So why would it make sense to keep people in a place that could kill them in 5 years? And if they want to be even based on trauma, you know the trauma was from the derailment.
Well, that's one of the reasons.
So they should be able to move.
That's one of the reasons we put both the health monitoring and mental health services into our settlement.
That the moving part should be on us.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. I just broke what I believe is a massive, game-changing investigative story that exposes the EPA and Norfolk Southern have been misleading the public, particularly the residents of East Palestine, Ohio, and Western Pennsylvania, for 21 months about the safety of their air and water and soil after Norfolk Southern was allowed to unnecessarily chemically nuke parts of Ohio and Western Pennsylvania. The link to this Substack report that we just dropped is right below in the description under the video. We're about to play the audio of a conversation I obtained between a top EPA official who's been on the ground in East Palestine for most of the 21 months after the derailment and detonation, and a Pennsylvania resident that lives 6 miles from East Palestine. In the conversation, the EPA official makes private admissions that are a complete contradiction to what the EPA and Norfolk Southern have been telling the public, including the fact that Norfolk Southern misled residents that the air was safe directly after it nuked East Palestine and Pennsylvania, and he admits the EPA failed to adequately warn residents of the health risks. Please, please, please listen to this full audio, and I'll give my thoughts after.
Why didn't you guys tell people that from the start, that we had been exposed?
So we never said that you weren't, and that's, I'll say this to anybody that asks, and if you stick a reporter and a camera in my face, I'll say the same thing. One of the things that we look back on, the way we described risk out here, was that, I wish that we would have done a better job helping, especially the people immediately local, understand, what they were dealing with. They came back into town, right? And they smelled chemicals, right? Well, if you smell chemicals, then you're exposed to chemicals, right?
Yeah. Even
though they're well below our action levels, they're still there, and you're still exposed, right? And if I could go back and change one thing, when we set up the temporary relocation program, which we did a month after the derailment, I wish we would have done that.
Yeah, it was like we were
on.
exposed for a month, and then people that, they didn't smell it or they weren't sick.
What frustrated me was, this is before I got here, because, I wasn't here the first couple weeks.
Yeah.
When I saw on TV the CEO for Norfolk Southern come out and say the air is safe.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's not going to go over well. You never say that. What you say is, you gotta be. People that don't understand our business, they don't realize that words matter, right? And and I don't know. I'd have to go back and listen to how our administrator characterized it, or how our people on the ground characterized it in those early days. But what I've got to believe that we said, and again, I have to go back and look, would have been, we're not seeing any levels above our action levels, right? Which is true. It was accurate. But the second piece to that is, I wish the whole of the responding community, us, local government, state government, Norfolk Southern, everybody would have said, listen, guys, if you're not comfortable coming home yet, don't come home. It's still, these acrylate compounds stink. They stink to high heaven, even though we're not seeing them above our action levels. It still smells here.
Yeah.
And, you may be sensitive to those, those low-level chemicals or those odors, and that would have been the right way to do it. Apparently, they didn't do it that way. And again, the only thing I saw, I still remember the day I was watching the television. The air is safe. I'm like, oh my God. When you talk about the research that Dr. Galam's doing about multiple exposures to low-level contaminants. Early research shows that is a real phenomenon, right? But the research hasn't advanced enough to know whether or not, to give us the give us the regulatory power to take action, right? Because there's too many scientific uncertainties.
Yeah, and I also don't understand that because there's like no scientific reason for us to be sick, like because of data or whatever, then why let us stay here?
Well,
why make us stay here?
I would say that a different way. No, I would say that a different way. There's, you had an exposure, right? Mm-hmm. But you really don't know what that exposure was, right? Nobody knows what happened on your property at the time that you were there, right? And the other thing we don't know is what caused your, ailments, right? Was it derailment related? We
weren't sick before.
That's what you said, right? Exactly. So, but again, you need to be able to. There needs to be a validated link, right?
Yeah.
And we just don't have it.
Right.
But
then why not take into, you don't know if, because of, you can't validate it, you don't know.
Let me tell you a story.
So why would it make sense to keep people in a place that could kill them in 5 years? And if they want to be even based on trauma, the trauma was from the derailment.
Well, that's one of the reasons.
So they should be able to move.
That's one of the reasons we put both the health monitoring and mental health services into our settlement.
That the moving part should be on us.
Yeah.
It should be on Norfolk Southern. If we feel we need to move, then they should have to pay for it.
Yeah, I understand your point.
Well, I don't even know where to start, but let's start with the major piece of this. I am going to read it verbatim. He said, when I saw on TV the CEO of Norfolk Southern, Alan Shaw, who was recently fired, come out and say the air is safe, I remember thinking to myself, well, that is not going to go over well. You never say that, Durno told Christina Sisiloff, a Pennsylvania resident who lives 6 miles from the derailment detonation. Later in the conversation, which occurred on October 11th, Durno circled back to Norfolk Southern's assurances that the air was safe. I still remember the day I was watching the television and Norfolk Southern CEO said the air is safe. Like, oh my God. Wait a minute here. You're privately saying that Norfolk Southern CEO going on television saying the air was safe, he shouldn't have said that, which means it's not true. When you're saying, oh my God, you never say that. But the EPA, which you work for, echoed the same exact thing over and over and over again, despite residents getting nosebleeds, despite residents' eyes burning.
Come back to the hotel room, my hands would be peeling. Well, then I started vomiting and passing blood.
Your eyes.
Yeah.
Bloodshot.
It started yesterday. I don't know why.
Despite residents now coming down with cancer and strokes.
And then this year in August, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Mm-hmm. I've gone through 2 surgeries in 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if Norfolk Southern had anything to do with it, but I got breast cancer.
And seizures.
I mean, I had everything done possible at the hospital, and they still can't find nothing, but I'm still having seizures.
And full body tingling. Despite residents coming down with early puberty in young children.
People are still getting sick. We have kids that are going through puberty issues with hormones. They're getting acne at age 6. It is very uncommon for a whole town and surrounding areas to have kids around the age 6, 7, and 8 to have hormones to produce puberty.
Young girls entering puberty and having early menstrual cycles as young as 7 or 8. You mentioned your 8-year-old daughter is now developing puberty in terms of her cycle, or?
She's had multiple. We actually just went to a doctor about a month ago or so. She actually had got an injection. She has to get every 3 months for a while just to pause it.
Memory loss, cognitive issues, people peeing blood, people pooping blood. This is just a partial list, by the way. I've spoken with residents who have early dementia. I've spoken with young women losing their hair completely. Were you still having any other symptoms that kept going?
My kids would experience rashes on occasion, but by the end of March, I noticed that my hair was falling out and breaking off, and it wasn't its normal texture. And
I don't like asking a woman how old, but
yeah,
you're not.
35.
You told the residents, the air's fine. We're finding low levels under our action level. Let's get to that. He also said in this conversation with the resident, understand what they're dealing with, meaning we should have told residents better what they were dealing with. They came into town and they smelled chemicals. Well, if you smell chemicals, then you're exposed to chemicals, even though they're well below our action levels. They're still there and you're still exposed, right? If I could go back and change one thing, when we set up the temporary relocation program, which we did a month after the derailment, I wish we would have done that earlier on. Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. You're saying that if you're smelling chemicals, you're exposed to chemicals, even though they're, quote, under our action levels. Folks, let me explain the fallacy of even though they're below our action levels, okay? The EPA's action levels is basically just the level of chemical contamination that the EPA decides is a trigger that it's too high. That's what their action level means. We need to take action or remediate if a chemical reaches a certain level or people are exposed to a certain level of a chemical. Keyword, a chemical, one chemical. The EPA responded, and we are going to talk to experts later today about this, including a toxicologist and an independent tester. The EPA responded to this, and Durno, the EPA official in this tape, is responding to this. They are evaluating the disaster in East Palestine and Pennsylvania in terms of only looking at humans exposed to singular chemicals, human exposure and risk in terms of being exposed to one chemical. They were exposed to dozens and dozens and dozens of chemicals simultaneously at the same time. So your action level for individual chemicals that humans are exposed to is irrelevant. It's outdated. It is not appropriate to be evaluating the health risks based on measuring individual chemicals and the action level that the EPA would remediate because they weren't exposed to one chemical. They weren't exposed to one chemical at a time. They were exposed to a chemical cocktail at the same time, which experts I talked to for this story, and again, the link is in the description, they explain that. Let me read this to you from George Thompson, who is a toxicologist with 55 years of experience. He is saying is basically what I just told you, that Durno's insistence that, well, the chemicals were under our action level. This does not take into account residents' exposure to a cocktail of chemicals, many of which produce the same effect that may result in synergistic toxicity. He added that the EPA grossly underestimated the unprecedented, diverse spectrum of highly hazardous chemical exposures, over 8.5 million pounds in total, that had the potential to contaminate the total environment, including the food chain for over 8 to 16 states. Thompson argued the EPA's response has been deeply flawed and based on an outdated toxicological paradigm in which the agency is still regulating based on the risks that individual chemicals pose to humans. More simply put, the EPA's response and air, water, and soil testing that's been done in East Palestine and Pennsylvania looked through a narrow lens of human exposure to individual chemicals rather than human exposure to a cocktail of chemicals all at once. And I believe one of the most telling admissions he made, and again, I'm not really holding my breath that the mainstream media is going to cover any of this, is when he said, I wish the whole of the responding community, us, the EPA, local government, state government, Norfolk Southern, everybody would have said these acrylate compounds, they stink to the high heavens. And even though we're not seeing them above our action levels, which I just described as BS, it still smells here. And you may be sensitive to those low level chemicals or those odors. That would have been the right way to do it. Again, we've already established that their action levels is totally irrelevant for this situation because their action levels are based on individual chemical exposure, not a goddamn chemical petri dish and being exposed to dozens of chemicals at once. That same toxicologist I just quoted, his analysis found that as many as 120 chemicals linked to cancer were produced by this controlled burn, i.e., chemical nuking that was not controlled. So he's saying right there, we should have told people they might be sensitive to these chemicals, i.e., you might have some problems. And after a $600 million settlement was agreed to, a settlement that was not based on science, a settlement that, based on my reporting, sure seems to have been expedited by money-hungry lawyers, he admitted that there's too many scientific uncertainties to definitively know what the long-term health risks are to East Palestine residents and Pennsylvania residents. Quote, there's too many scientific uncertainties, he told Sisolov about ongoing research that is being conducted on the health risks associated with humans being exposed to multiple toxic chemicals simultaneously. Durno acknowledged that early research shows this is a real phenomenon. Natural response from Christina. Then why let us stay here if you're not sure? Why would it make sense to keep people in a place that could kill them in 5 years? I'm not holding my breath that the mainstream media is going to pick this up, even though in a sane media system, this would be front page news. But what you have here is an EPA official fairly casually admitting in private that the multi-billion-dollar company, railroad company, I think criminal company, that unnecessarily blew up 5 cars of cancerous gas over the heartland, even though it's already been revealed they were told they didn't have to, they were told not to, they blew off those warnings from the experts, that they misled the public that it was safe to come home. The EPA parroted, echoed those sentiments, even though right here an EPA official is telling you it wasn't smart to say that because it wasn't true. And he's admitting we should have relocated residents earlier, and ongoing research into the harms and the threats of humans being exposed to multiple chemicals at the same time is valid, is a real phenomenon, and at the moment, there's too many scientific uncertainties to know what the long-term health risks are to residents. So why is the United States government allowing these residents to stay? Why is the United States government not forcing the company? And the United States government is still President Joe Biden. Why is the United States government not forcing Norfolk Southern to offer permanent relocation at their cost that they pay for to any resident that wants to leave in East Palestine or nearby Western Pennsylvania? And will President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, who represents these people in Ohio currently, are they going to do anything about this? We're going to cover this extensively later on our live stream.